Welcome back everybody to linuxacademy.com. My name is Terry, and in today's video we continue our exploration of Nginx, the web server. So we're going to talk about configuring our Nginx web server for logging. Now by default, in the nginx.conf file, there is a number of log directives that are included. So let's go ahead and take a look at what those are. So if we switch to our etc nginx directory and we do a vi on our nginx configuration file, we'll see a couple of different things. We'll see the error log directive, error_log, that tells us that our error log for the entire nginx system itself will go to var log nginx error.log. And we'll see a couple of other commented things right underneath of it, and these are different values for how we capture errors. Do we want notices? Do we just want information? Or do we want the whole shebang? And in this case, we have it configured for any error that is generated by our Nginx system is logged to var log nginx error log. Now that's defined within our nginx.conf file. But our access log, and the difference between an error log and an access log is an access log assumes that our service is running and answering HTTP connections correctly, so therefore HTTP is going to answer for requests that are then logged in an access log, which is why it's defined in the HTTP or the server directives of our configuration. In this case, we have all of our server directives defined in vhosts, which we'll get to in a moment, but we have the access log defined in our nginx.conf file in the HTTP format. And you'll see that there's a log format that actually tells our system what information is logged in the order that it's logged in. We'll be covering a lot of these variables in a future video, but these right here, we're making a system level log format that's the remote address, the remote user, and the time of the request, the status, what was sent, who the refer was, the user agent, and the IP address that was either forwarded by proxy or directly for our client. And that's how the access log is set up and our error log is set up. Now again, because we're defining these error log and access log in our Nginx configuration, it applies to every domain that's configured on our system will be logged in these two directories or these two log files. So no matter what we do from here on out, everything for every domain is logged here. Now, what we have control over is we have domain level control over how we want each individual vhost log files defined. Because right now, if we drop out of this configuration and we go to our var log nginx directory, we'll see that there's an access log and an error log. And if we cat out our access log, we'll see a number of our connections that we've been going through as we've been going through these videos and what files we've been asking for. And we can cat out the error log for the same examples. It'll tell us our domain, the keep alive timeout, in our last video when it was a duplicate as we tried to set it. So all of this is at a system level, the logging that is maintained by Nginx. However, if you have a number of virtual hosts on your system answering for a number of domains, and I've seen upwards of several hundred on a cluster of web servers that are answering for several hundred domains, load balanced, you'll want to keep your access and error logs in discrete files so that they're more easily searchable or reported upon. That's easy enough to do. All we have to do is go to our vhost d directory and we'll pick our www.myexample virtual host. And all we're going to do is we're going to repeat those items. Now, if we wanted a different log format for this particular domain, we could say only use a log format that we create. In this case, we're going to leave the default alone, so it will log accesses and errors based on the globally defined log format from our configuration file, but we could overwrite that on a domain. For example, if we just wanted to track which IPs are visiting a domain, we could just grab the X HTTP forwarded for variable for our log format. Now, we're not going to do that here. We're just going to define a generic log. And one of the other great things is if you have multiple servers defined within your vhost, you can define multiple log files. What I mean by that is, let's go over here right above, below server and above location. Let's go ahead and insert a line, and let's access log. And this can literally be any place that our web process has the ability to write to. So we're going to do var log nginx, and we're going to call it myexample.access.http.log. Now that may seem like a long log, but because I have two servers defined within my virtual host, I now have the ability to differentiate the access and error logs for my HTTP versus HTTPS connections. That may be important because I am doing e-commerce, for example, on my HTTPS connections, whereas I'm just doing standard non-secure web page serving on my HTTP connections. So I really wouldn't care that all of my SSL traffic, or I wouldn't want my SSL traffic mixed up with my non-secure traffic. So here I'm going to do my example.error.http.log, and then right underneath of the server name here, I'm also going to do an access log. And here I'm going to differentiate these log files by calling them the HTTPS equivalent. Now that I have these log files defined, we're going to do an nginx-t to test my configuration and make sure that nothing has changed. And then we'll do a service nginx restart to pick up my configuration changes. I didn't have nginx running, so it didn't stop on this case, but it has started correctly. And then I'm going to execute a links connection to both of these so that I can generate some traffic that we can look at. So if we do an HTTP to www.myexample.local, we'll see a web page. We'll do the same exact thing to HTTPS, myexample.local, and we're getting an SSL certificate error, which, because it's a self-signed certificate, we expect, and we set that up in a previous video. And now let's generate a couple of errors by going to something that doesn't exist. And we'll get an HTTP 404. And finally, we'll do the same thing for HTTPS, something that doesn't exist. We get a self-signed certificate, but we get an HTTP 404 error. Now, if we've done everything right, we should be able to go to var log nginx, and let's clear our screen. And we should see that we have 4 additional log files. We have myexample.access HTTP and error, and then we have myexample.https access and error. And if we cat myexample access HTTP, we see that the log file was to try to get on a particular location, including the something that doesn't exist. But in the error, if we cat the myexample error HTTP, we'll see that we just capture the error in this case. So this gives us some greater flexibility in how we can parse the logging on a vhost or domain level. If we cat out the access log, we'll see that we still have the information from our overall system, but now the traffic for www.myexample.local is being written to the myexample access and error logs for HTTP and HTTPS. So we have a good level of control over any number of things in our virtual host configuration, including logging. In this case, we didn't override the log format, but we overrode the log location for just this domain. So if we'd gone to any other domain that uses a vhost, it would have simply gone to the access or error log, whereas in our case, we overrode the error log and access log for the my example domain and created custom logging. So for controlling logging inside of your vhost, as well as the Nginx configuration itself, that's all there is to it. And my name is Terry for Linux Academy.